Hello and welcome to the Vegan Kids Nutrition Podcast. Today I have a very special guest speaking with us all about plant-based menus in schools. Jodi Gruhn is the director of Wholesome Minnesota, a nonprofit organization that supports organizations serve more plant-based meals. And in her role, Jodi fiercely advocates for plant-based options in Minnesota schools, partnering with nutrition leaders, parents, students, and teachers to be the change in their organization. She's also a board-certified health and wellness coach, certified in plant-based nutrition, and is a licensed Food for Life instructor with the Physicians for Responsible Medicine. Jodi shares what led her to follow a plant-based lifestyle for herself and her family, her experience with packing plant-based school lunches, which I know is something that many of us want to hear from other parents, and a wealth of knowledge about the misconceptions, challenges, and hope for bringing more plant-based meals to schools. So stay with us until the end because she shares with you what you can do in your area to be the change your child and school district needs for more plant-based meals. And yes, even if you are shy or an introvert like myself, there are still ways that you can help advocate for more plant-based meals for all students, including your own. All right, let's get started. I'm Karla Moreno-Bryce, a vegan, mom, and registered dietitian, and your host of the Vegan Kids Nutrition Podcast. All information provided in this podcast is intended to be used for nutritional educational purposes only. Please consult with a licensed professional prior to beginning or modifying your diet or making changes to the diet of a child in your care. All right, let's get started. Well, hi, Jodi. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Karla. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm really excited for you to be here because your work involves with plant-based meals to schools and organizations. And as a vegan parent myself, this is something that I challenge with my oldest, with sending, our kids to school. And so I'm excited for you to share more to our listeners about what your work involves. But before we do that, why don't you share us a little bit about you, where you're from, and what led you to a plant-based lifestyle?
Sure. Well, I am born and raised here in Minnesota. I have never left. I am still here. I thought because I married somebody who is a transplant that maybe he'd want to go elsewhere, but he tells me this is the best place in the world. He said,
nice.
This is the place you want to be. You'll just want to move back, which I have seen happen with many of my friends. So I've been here my whole life, and I found a plant-based lifestyle. Actually, I was vegetarian for many years. And then it was, that story of seeing that footage of factory farms and just going, oh my gosh, never again. But I didn't really have the knowledge around sort of the dairy industry to understand kind of that there was next level. So it really was me going to a veg fest. Actually, it was going to a veg fest and taking the time actually as a new mom. One of the first things that I did for myself was there was this thing that I read about called Veg Fest. And I jumped on my bike one day and I left the baby behind with my husband. And I don't think I had done that yet really before. And I went to this thing called Veg Fest and I was like, oh, you don't have to eat dairy and eggs. You can be really healthy. You can, so I sort of discovered this new path. And I think within 3 months, I had fully transitioned to becoming plant-based. And then after that, I got involved in the movement and started doing advocacy, working for a local organization on actually that very same event for many years. So it was kind of a full circle kind of thing. And now I actually work for the organization doing this work and outreach in schools.
That's amazing. And I want to hear more about your work because I think it's really important and it's something that we need right now, especially as more families choose to raise kids on a plant-based lifestyle. Now, I know you have two
Mhm.
school-age kids of your own.
Sure do.
Tell us a little bit about your experience with school lunches, because I know that this is a challenge that many of us face. And I know that many of my audience want to hear more about what other parents do.
Well, my kids are a little older. So I have one that just started high school and then one that's in middle school. So they actually have more sort of agency to ask for what they want and need, which I know is harder for the little ones. And that's kind of when the parents, when we need parents to be kind of stepping in and being advocates for their families. With my own children, I think what even got me really interested in school lunch was I was packing a lunch for them when they were little most of the time. But then I went and saw it was called an Ed Talk, and it was put on by like a civics organization. It was down at the Ice House, and Bertrand Weber from Minneapolis Public Schools was there speaking. And he was really passionate about school nutrition and really passionate about what we were feeding our kids. He's not vegan by any means, but he was much more interested in scratch cooking, building out kitchens back or putting kitchens back into the schools and really feeding kids more whole foods. And that was something really interesting to me. And I was just like a light bulb went off that this was happening in my own school district. And I wasn't paying attention to school nutrition. I was just like, I think it's probably not going to be great. So I'm just going to pack a lunch. And that's really what made me kind of get involved. And so I started volunteering in the school lunchroom. Actually, Minneapolis Public Schools did something like True Food. It was True Food taste tests, and they would bring in kind of cultural and interesting foods for kids to try. And they all ended up being plant-based when I did some of the sampling. And you'd walk around the kids and they would try these foods and they'd give you feedback. And I came to realize that that's what a lot of schools actually do to introduce new menu items and
Yep.
get feedback from the students. So it was seeing him that kind of got me interested, and then started getting my own kids like, okay, let's see what school lunch will be like for you. And then the reports would be back, well, I asked for this, but I still came with cheese. So I just pulled the cheese off and just ate the bread. Or, there was a lot of that
Yep.
happening then, and it's still happening now. So I think there's progress and we can talk about that. But I think that, generally kids are having to kind of make do with what is available and then kind of like create the lunch that they want to eat with like kind of what is provided for them.
Right. Yes. And it's great that as your kids, now that they're older, they're able to advocate more for themselves. I know with my oldest, she's going into first grade now. To her, it doesn't come as natural as many to other kids or older kids. And so we do have to pack a lunch. And there's not many families who are fortunate enough to have schools or daycares or other, facilities that provide plant-based meals to their kids. So it's hard for us and it's hard
Yeah.
for our kids too.
Well, and it's really hard for people who are on, limited budget and income, especially now we're calling this like universal meals. We're calling it free school lunch for everyone. But actually, like if we really want to dig down on like a definition of what that is, it's not for everyone. So,
Correct.
we're working on that and kind of trying to work on messaging around that idea that like these meals need to be universal. Every child should have access to food that is nourishing and delicious and fits their needs.
Yes, I totally agree, which brings me to a point of wanting to talk a little bit more about your work with Wholesome Minnesota, because it focuses on bringing plant-based menus to healthcare and educational settings like hospitals and schools. Now, when working with schools specifically, what are common misconceptions that schools have about plant-based meals? Because I anticipate that they have a lot of objections about offering plant-based meals.
So yes, there are definitely objections, but I also would say that there's definitely a new openness that I have noticed in the last few years. When I first started this work, I could hardly get phone calls with people or, I mean, let alone a meeting. And now I speak at the school nutrition conference and I have sessions that are absolutely full. So people are curious about this. They know that there's a growing demand for it, and that it's coming, that eventually they're going to need to be providing this stuff. these particular meals. I would say one still common misconception is that it's expensive. Cost really isn't, it's not expensive. Plant-based, especially if we're talking about whole food plant-based, rice and beans are like some of the most inexpensive foods on the planet. And that's what, many of us who have plant-based households, like that's like a staple and almost, I don't know, I think that's something we have 2 or 3 times a week, in different kind of concoctions and varieties. So it doesn't have to be expensive. It can be expensive when we're looking at like the meat analog products. Like Impossible burgers are expensive. They're expensive in our own homes. They are also expensive for schools. But also though, if we wanted to, if we're looking at those kind of products, they aren't providing them for the entire student body. So actually, that expense argument, even for those meat analog products, doesn't really necessarily hold true. But it's easy to come up with these menus. There's tons of menus that have actually been created and school nutrition approved, lunches, menus that are available to all school nutrition directors that I have access to. I have partners around the country that have this stuff that, like can meet any budget basically. So cost is one thing. The difficulty, it's just too hard. It's too hard. Well, we're providing meals for kids with allergies. We're providing, kids that have actually, like physical conditions where they can't ingest certain types of foods. When we're providing those kind of things for those kids, we could also be providing, like if a child can't, is lactose intolerant, those kind of meals could be provided similarly to a kid who has the need for a plant-based or vegan meal. So there's ways to do that. And also there's just ways to default our meals in a way that makes them naturally more accessible for everyone by, replacing the meat with beans, or a meat analog product, or just some crumbles or something like that. So it's just not as hard as people think. And if you think of like even things that, many of us eat, like pastas, bowls, wraps, things of that nature, they're filled with tons of things other than cheese and meat. They're filled with vegetables and pickles and, lots of delicious things. So there's ways around this that it makes it not very difficult at all.
Yes, I agree. I think it's definitely possible, and it's not something that they have to, start from scratch because, someone like you who can come in and help implement a menu or even just slight changes so that it is inclusive for
Right.
kids who choose to eat non-animal foods. And
Right.
so I think the idea behind bringing in plant-based menus, yes, it's something new, but it is something that it's possible for schools to offer.
I would also want to mention one thing, and this will come up again, but it's just saying, that we hear a lot of that the kids won't eat it and there just isn't a big demand for it. And there isn't, there isn't the huge demand that I think a lot of us who live this way are like, everybody wants this. There's a small percentage of us that live this lifestyle, like 100%. Where it's growing is the conventional eaters. We know that, it's like 60% of Americans are reducing their meat intake. So that is trickling into our families for sure. And that means families are doing things like Meatless Mondays or some variety of that where they're just not eating as much meat. And people want that option for their kids. So that's a thing that I like to come back and say is just like, if we're looking at progress and progression and market demand, I think you will see that if you offer these types of meals, they will actually, the uptake will be great. And the thing is though, they have to be good. They can't be just a second thought. It's like, nobody likes a mushy black bean burger. I don't like, and especially if it's just put on a bun with like no sauce or lettuce or, anything. And it's called just like a vegan black bean burger. Like that is not selling anybody anything, call it something delicious and add, like the spicy, it could be called just the spicy black bean burger. Kids love spice. And, throw on like some spicy saucy burger. I don't know. Like we have to come up with like our marketing and create ways that all this food is enticing to not just our plant-based and vegan kids, but to the overall population of children.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Now, from covering ideas about how certain organizations or schools may have challenge or objections about bringing in plant-based meals, you shared with us a little bit about some of the workshops and talks that you have with others, like at school nutrition conferences. Tell us a bit more about what they are saying and kind of where, where do they want this to be in terms of school nutrition?
So what I'm just seeing is generally more interest for sure. So when I've spoke at so this is a cool thing. Last year was my first year speaking at the Minnesota School Nutrition Conference, and that's where all the nutrition professionals come in and they have educational programming, they get CE credits. And then there's like a big exhibit hall, which that's a whole other episode probably to talk about who's in those exhibit halls, marketing food products to the people who purchase food for our children. So I did a presentation and it was jam-packed one year, and I was the only person talking about plant-based. This year, there were 3 different sessions on plant-based. So that is generally showing, forward momentum in this category. All the sessions had people in them. Some were more attended than others, but it was us and Farm to School, not like that had kind of the largest kind of representation, I think, of kind of those ideas or programs. So that was really exciting to see. And I only see that growing. And I think it is because demand and people are hearing more that the students want it. But they are still saying that they aren't getting the demand that they would expect for hearing all of this information about what's happening in the markets. And they're saying it's just not translating to schools. And I mean, I have a lot of opinions about that, especially if we're talking about younger students, again, talking about the quality, what we're putting out there. But they're interested. And I also spoke, I did a presentation, a Zoom for the same group over in April, and I focused on the environment. And that was where we really dug deep into the fact that being a school nutrition professional is really a climate job. Like if you think about it and you think about food waste, I mean, everything that we think about, the packaging we put everything in, and with school lunchrooms being the largest restaurant in the United States, that's a huge impact that they could have in all of those areas. And so just talking about generally plant-based and its impact around the environment, I think that's a trigger for some. I think generally there is that health concern and, the noticing of whether they know the stats or not, they can see the students walking through the door, what they look like, what they feel like. They know that kids are suffering with mental health issues. So I think school nutrition people have huge hearts and they want to do good, but they are forced to do a job with no budget, super tight regulations and rules. And then they have parents that have demands as well. So what I also want to say to all of us, who are out here advocating for our kids, knowing that this is the right thing for them, is that we need to understand, kind of who these people are, what they're working in, what the climate is like for them, and then find a way that we can create a win-win for all of us. And I think creating partnerships and collaborations are definitely the way to do it.
I agree. And thank you for sharing that, because I don't think many of us as parents who are not in that environment really see what these individuals have to factor in when bringing in meals for students. There's regulations to follow, there's certain standards to meet. And so I do agree that school nutrition does have a big impact for kids, because many kids, these are the only meals that they have throughout the day. And so if we can be an impact for them, then we should.
Yes.
I do remember my first job as a dietitian was working for an independent meal service provider, which provided meals for charter schools. And part of my role was not just about creating the menus for schools, but, it was also following nutritional guidelines and also cost and stuff. But there were other logistics with actually meeting those meals to the students? Like, how are we going to ensure that there's the right temperature to consider
Yes.
food safety? How are we going to transport them at the right time to each school? And so there's all these other factors that, school nutrition staff have to consider. So thank
Yeah.
you for bringing that to our
Yeah, it's
attention.
just a very complex environment. And I think that a lot of times we just want to snap our fingers. That's the way I was. I'm like, come on, can't you just do this? But really, I think we can't just snap our fingers and like fix something that's kind of been chugging along for years, the way it's been going. I think it's going now in the right direction with just a lot of people are noticing. I think school nutrition has become a way bigger, interesting topic that has expanded more. And I think parents are more interested in nutrition than they've ever been. I think students too, like they're demanding like a decent quality meal, like I think with the advent of social media and all the influencers, and I think that students' palates have grown so much more mature and they're much more just interested in food and a good meal. Like food is a big deal and it's just part of our DNA, who we are, how we define ourselves. And that's the other thing, with school food is just that whole idea of, does our food reflect back at us who we think we are, So that's another place where I do see a lot of growth is like involving the cultural inclusivity piece. And really a lot of schools are doing really cool things to meet the needs of like our Somali students, our Hispanic students. Like they're actually trying to source the right spices to make a dish actually authentic instead of just inspired by and just adding a spice that might not, like actually fit the dish. I just spoke with a school nutrition director just last week, and that's what she was telling me about that. And I was just like, oh, so beautiful, so beautiful.
And so, speaking of that, why can't we expand our inclusivity to plant-based meals where it doesn't just necessarily have to be for kids who are vegan or kids who are plant-based, but with you mentioning accommodating individuals from other cultures, why can't we speak about more inclusivity across the spectrum of food? Do you think that that's something that school nutrition staff might be inclined to do?
Yeah, I do actually, but I think that we actually have to come at it from so one so I was as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about the strongest voices like often can be voices that maybe we wouldn't think of as being the most impactful. And that could be around religious communities. There's a religion called Jain. And we have a large, not, I don't know how large it is, but they do a festival that I just went to this early summer, and it was wonderful. But they do not eat any meat. And they are talking a lot more about dairy because dairy in India is very different than dairy here. So that's a religion where they need to have these meals provided, vegan meals provided, basically to like live a life of no harm, So I think that is going to resonate a lot more than, unfortunately, just us having if it's ethics, our unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be the argument that makes the change. I also think too that it might not be us; it's going to be our conventional eater partners. So if we do have friends who like to eat plant-based a couple times a week, or like to feed their kids that way a couple times a week, their voices and coming together with them are going to be able to move the dial much more quickly than if it's just us vegans getting together and trying to make change.
Yeah, I like hearing that. Can you share with us a little bit about some of the successful case studies or examples of schools or districts that have effectively implemented plant-based meal programs?
So I have evidence, or I should say I have anecdotal evidence of kind of what's happening here locally. So that presentation that I did this spring in April around the environment, just took a quick poll of the, I don't know, I think it was like 50 or so people that were on the call. And there were some that said that they served a plant-based option every day. Most of them were in the 2 to 3 kind of, times a week, which is great actually, because I would say a couple years ago that would have been 0. So that's great. We've had school districts interested in signing pledges to go, a certain percentage plant-based, but a lot of times that gets scary because again, it's going to be based upon demand. And if they sign a pledge, then they feel like they're going to need to serve it. And, so we've kind of moved a little bit towards just helping out as much as possible and just sharing recipes and sharing marketing tips and doing all that kind of stuff. I would say our partners on the coasts are actually having a lot more success. And I think it's going to trickle down in here, but New York City Public Schools, they have like a plant-powered Friday, and I think they might even have a Wednesday that they do. They have successfully put in default veg into their hospitals, where every meal it's served in the particular hospital system is default veg, like vegan meal, and you have to ask if you want meat, which makes so much sense when you think of somebody coming out of surgery or something, or they're in the hospital for a condition. It makes sense to be provided with something that's very healthy and wholesome, maybe as you're starting to recover. So I like to see, I love seeing that. And then of course in California, they've been doing great work, and they've had actually a lot of pilot programs and things that have been actually funded by their government to get, do some pilots around plant-based milk and different food items. So the coasts are like our beacons, but I think it's trickling in. We also have, Illinois, which signed into law, that any student that requests a plant-based meal can get one. So if a student requests a plant-based meal, they can actually get it in Illinois, all through the state. So that's pretty cool. And we're starting to see that kind of legislation pop up around.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And the reason why I wanted you to speak more about that was mostly just to bring hope for other parents who are, waiting for that to happen locally for them. And so, what do you think we can learn from their experiences, from where you're seeing other schools or areas that are implementing such plant-based meals?
So, it comes from leadership. So we, as parents can all get together and try to make things happen. But we know that if we have a strong leader in government that can help push things along, that is where we can actually see change. Policy and legislation can cause a lot of change, or it forces change, actually. I think we still have work to do, and definitely boots on the ground is super important, because we need to educate people in power and people who are the decision makers that this is important to us and important for our kids' future. So really, I think it's, if you see what happened in New York, like it's a mayor, it's the mayor of New York City who is driving a lot of this and has put in policies that make all of this really possible there. In terms of hope around here, like I said, I just see momentum shifting. I see only more options occurring in school districts. We've gotten reports that there's going to be hot lunch items in one district at least every single day that are vegan. And I just see that continuing to happen. And I think as parents, honestly, creating collaborations with our school nutrition directors, but also within our own communities, and especially with those parents who are conventional eaters. That is where I really think the hope is if we can just all rally behind like the health and wellness of our kids and of our planet, and recognize like it's the right thing to do to just move in this direction. Not everybody has to be 100% plant-based, but if we can move in this direction, it's going to be better for everybody.
Yep. Now, for parents who want to advocate, but they may feel a little shy, or they may feel afraid to speak up, what advice or strategies would you give to them?
Well, the first thing, which you can always do super quietly, is send an email, So the first thing is, contact your school nutrition director. If you don't know who that is, or you don't know quite how to find that person, you can contact me and I can help you find out who that person is in your district. So I'll give you my information at the end. So super happy to do that. I also have, emails and scripts and things like that I can share. So you don't even have to start from scratch. You can put that into kind of your own voice and with your own concerns. But the main thing with that reach out, that initial thing, is to be positive, to be complimentary of the work that's being done, noticing wellness, noticing inclusivity, all of those kind of things that are really important, and words that are being thrown around in schools right now, I think is really important. But kill people with kindness and stay positive. That's going to be like the first step. And then after that, I mean, if you don't even feel comfortable with the email piece of it, contact me. We can talk. And I can also see if there's other parents that I've ever talked to before in your district. There's been some districts where I've reached out, parents have reached out, and nothing happens, And sometimes that goes away, or sometimes we just keep knocking at doors. But I can tell you that when I've worked with student groups and they're not heard, this actually happened at one high school. They took it to the school board. So I think that if you don't get any, and it's not even commitment, it's if you just don't get a response, then that's when you start going to administration. And because the superintendent is that person's boss. So if they're going to be unresponsive to you, then take it to the superintendent and start having those discussions there. But also too, if you're comfortable in your school, and you can start kind of a community, like if you're part of the PTO or the PTA, like that's a really great place to start discussions around school nutrition or even just family nutrition. And through my program, Wholesome Minnesota, we come in and we do talks and we do little cooking demos and classes and stuff where we could even show how to prepare. We could show what a school lunch meal could look like that's plant-based to like different staff members. We can talk to teachers. It's all about education. And a lot of times, people don't know how to implement this or create these meals just because they haven't had experience with it. So I'm sure all of us, any of us that didn't grow up vegan, we had a learning curve. And I know I did. And I feel like I'm still learning all the time. And I think it's so fun. But yeah, this food is really fun and it's for everybody. And we just need to kind of let people know and educate people. The other thing I would also mention too is looking up to see if your school has a wellness committee or wellness initiatives. And if they do have a committee and they allow volunteers and parents to get involved, that is a great place to start as well. If you don't want to start those conversations with school nutrition right away or anything, the wellness parents are going to be your friends. So they're going to be your people, and it's great. That's a great way to start creating community as well.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing those. I think our listeners are going to feel inspired to choose the right approach that they feel comfortable with in advocating for not just their own kids, but I think for all kids who attend those particular schools. Now, before we go, I would really like for you to share where someone can reach out to you if they want to learn more about Wholesome Minnesota or just more about how they can be an advocate for plant-based meals.
Yeah. So Wholesome Minnesota is just Wholesome Minnesota with a WH, Wholesome, Minnesota.org. And you can just go to the website. You can kind of see what we've been up to. There's some articles there about things that have been happening, kind of with the progress of plant-based. And there's ways to reach me there, or else you can just reach out at Jodi, Jodi, .Gruhn, Gruhn, at exploreveg.org.
Thank you. And we'll leave those links and the email as well in the show notes so that our audience can listen to those.
Yeah. And absolutely reach out. That's my whole job. My whole job is to partner, create collaborations, work with you, work with your students, help your kids too, if they need talking points and, or if they want to start an initiative at their school. Like, I help with pilots, I help with collaborations, really the sky's the limit, and I'm happy to work with anyone.
Thanks, Jodi. And thank you for coming on the show to share your insight and the wonderful wealth of knowledge that you have in bringing plant-based meals to schools and organizations.
Great. Thanks, Karla.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Well, I hope you enjoyed our conversation and learning more about how Jodi and Wholesome Minnesota are advocating for bringing plant-based meals to schools across the state of Minnesota. Please check out Wholesome Minnesota and Borel website to see how Jodi can be of support in your plant-based journey. You can find the links to their websites in the show notes. I'll talk to you in the next episode. Bye for now.